Thanks, Joe. I'm Joy Connor, leader of the Wellspring community of Australia. So on behalf of all of the groups who are involved in organising today, which includes Wellspring, Pitt Street Uniting, Eremos and the St James Institute, I'm going to do acknowledgement of country for all of us. As we come together on the traditional lands of the Gadigal and Wangal people of the Eora Nation, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of this area and their descendants. We pay respects to the elders past, present and future. We also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the over 300 nations of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples across these lands, now called Australia, especially those who are here with us today. We acknowledge you and pay respects to your country, and to any Torres Strait Islander people, we acknowledge and pay respects to your island. We also pay respects to elders and community people who've come from other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island nations to this area, particularly Redfern, which is over the back here, and who work for the good of the land and communities who live here. They have been recognised by their community as respected elders. Especially we acknowledge today the elders who work such as Auntie Beryl Oplu, who works tirelessly for the good of the community and whose catering company will feed us today. And Auntie Ali Golding, who was hoping to be here today but hasn't been able to, who continues to be a force for goodness, kindness and love in Redfern, right into her very old age. We also acknowledge and pay respects to Uncle Ray Minikin, who lives on Gadigal and Wangal land in Glebe, especially as that community mourns some of its key Aboriginal leaders. We support the Uluru Statement of the Heart and its three central calls of voice, treaty and truth, and acknowledge it as a foundational document for justice for the First Nations people in this land, now called Australia, and we declare that sovereignty has never been ceded. We acknowledge the continuation of the cultural, spiritual and educational practices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, which is an essential part of the culture and soul of this nation. We pay respects to our speaker today, Nathan Tyson, an Aboriginal man of an Anaiwon and Gomeroi descent, and acknowledge his traditional nation and thank him for coming to further enlighten us. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy and Josephine. I'm Kate Scholl. I'm representing Eremos Institute, and also I'm part of the Uniting Church community here, and also I am in Wellspring. So, gosh, I get to wear 3 hats today. It's amazing my head isn't totally blown away by that. The journey of this event began in February at the conference, Raising Our Tribal Voice and Indigenous Theological Revolution, held in Melbourne by the School of Indigenous Studies at the University of Divinity. Inspired and challenged by that experience, Josephine and I began conversations to strategize how Pitt Street and Eremos might bring some of that wisdom and knowledge and experience and passion to a wider audience. And from that was the birth of the series today, which is our 3rd and final series of the series called Listening to Country and Indigenous Theology and Spirituality series. Sadly, the School of Indigenous Studies was closed by the University of Divinity in July, but the seeds they planted continue to grow, and we are one of those offshoots. folks from St. James and Wellspring heard of our project and wanted to join in. So the 4 sponsors then came together to create this event. And we are very grateful for the support of those 4 groups. And also, we're so pleased that so many people here today are from those different groups. We have Wellspring folks, you want to raise your yay? We have Eremos folks, yes, and we have St. James folks, and we have Pitt Street folks. And then we have just a lot of other people who are really interested. So, and that includes our folks online. So we welcome those people too from various parts of the country. Information about the groups are on the back tables there, so I hope you'll have a look, and especially during our afternoon tea this afternoon. The recording of the previous 2 speakers is now available on YouTube, the Pitt Street YouTube channel. So if you just go to that website and click on the YouTube link, you'll find those. You can also find them on the Eremos website. News items has a link, has information about those events. So we encourage you to enjoy those as well. It's truly been a collaborative effort to bring this series together. I want to give special thanks to the Pitt Street congregation and all the members who have been involved. There's many, many, many people who have worked behind the scenes, continuing to do so today, and all the work they've done to help to live stream this event. And I think I did warn you about this, Nathan, the protests about the war in Gaza are beginning, and the pounding and the vibrations will be with us for a few minutes until they pass. But fortunately, at least it's partly my time too. It will get louder before it gets softer. It's our experience, isn't it? Previous Sundays. So I expect that most of us here would agree the defeat of the Voice referendum last year was devastating, particularly for those who worked so hard for the Yes campaign. I know some of you, many of you were among that group. Nathan was also one of those champions, and we welcome him today to speak to us about post-Voice, truth, justice, and reconciliation. Nathan is an Aboriginal man of Anaiwon and Gomeroi heritage and currently head of the First People Strategy and Engagement for the Uniting Church Synod of New South Wales and ACT. Nathan's a lawyer with a Bachelor of Laws and Bachelor of Jurisprudence from the University of New South Wales, and this year he completed a graduate diploma in theological studies from Charles Sturt University. Nathan's professional story is one of leadership and engagement, roles where he's provided high-level advice and strategic direction in boardrooms and government agencies. It's also a story grounded in collaborative action and relationship building. Nathan's commitment to social justice, community building, and eliciting the best in people and communities will be apparent in his words this afternoon. He brings all of that to us today, and we look forward, Nathan, to you enriching our understanding of the issues we face as a nation and inspiring us to action. The hope of all our sponsors is that the seeds of this series continue to grow and flourish in our communities, churches, workplaces, neighborhoods, and families. Please join me in welcoming Nathan Tyson.
I feel like going outside. Anyway, how good is it? My hat off to those people outside. I think they're doing a wonderful thing, so it doesn't faze me at all. I'd just as soon be with them as in here. Yep, that's me. I do note all of the opinions I expressed today are mine, not necessarily shared by the Synod of New South Wales and the ACT. Hopefully most of them would be, but I will qualify to say this is just my opinion. I speak on behalf of myself as an Aboriginal person. I've done a lot of community engagement work over the years. I did 10 years of frontline complaint handling, so I know a lot. I've dealt with a lot of issues and spoken with a lot of people over a lot of years. So I do hope that the way I come across is broadly representative. It's not going to represent sort of the views of every person, but I hope I capture sort of a mainstream type Aboriginal perspective in what I say. I acknowledge I'm on the land of the Gadigal people. I was actually born at King George V in Camperdown, so I have a connection to this country. I am of Anaiwon and Gomeroi heritage from northwestern New South Wales around Tingha Bandara area. So I also have connection to there, even though through my family history, it's a very stretchy connection. Because up until about 5 years ago, my family thought that my nan's grandmother had died giving birth to her mother, and about 5 years ago we found out that she didn't. It was the Catholic Church involved that had put my nan's mum on a station, and she was told her mum died giving birth to her. Just a little tiny snippet of my heritage and my background. I want to start off today just reading a passage that I heard in church. I attend Penrith Uniting Church when I can, when I'm not out doing other things around the Synod. In the lead up to this, I was a bit nervous and a bit like, what do I say and how do I say it? And I went to church this morning in that sort of like, how do I start this conversation? And the passage that was in front of me did it for me. So I'm just going to read this. Many of you may have heard it this morning already. It's from James chapter 2, I think 1 to 10 and then 14 to 17. My brothers and sisters, believers in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ must not show favouritism. Suppose a man comes into your meeting wearing a gold ring and fine clothes, and a poor man in filthy old clothes also comes. If you show special attention to the man wearing the fine clothes and say, "Here's a good seat for you," but you say to the poor man, "You stand there," or "You sit on the floor by my feet," have you not discriminated amongst yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? Listen, my dear brothers and sisters, has not God chosen those who are poor in the eyes of the world to be rich in faith and to inherit the kingdom he promised to those who love him? But you have dishonoured the poor. Is it not the rich who are exploiting you? Are they not the ones who drag you into court? Are they not the ones who are blaspheming the noble name of him to whom you belong? If you really keep the royal law found in Scripture, love your neighbour as yourself, you are doing right. But if you show favouritism, you sin and are convicted by the law as lawbreakers. For whoever keeps the whole law and yet stumbles at just one point is guilty of breaking it all. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, "Go in peace, keep warm and well fed," but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, by faith itself, if it is not accompanied by action, In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. So I think it's fairly obvious what that passage is saying, and I thought it was just a good way to introduce this talk. You can just read that. I was just putting that in case my introduction needed a bit more. But essentially all I was going to say in that was I've been around, not my first rodeo. I've been on the ground. I've been in the trenches. I've I suppose, earned the stripes, I feel, to be able to talk about this stuff. So we go to the next one. So why should Christians support justice for Aboriginal peoples? So Jesus taught us that the two greatest commandments are to love God with all our heart and to love our neighbour as ourselves. If we consider the story of the Good Samaritan, we understand who our neighbour is. Jesus spoke about and demonstrated through his actions the importance of assisting those in need, the downtrodden and the outcast. Jesus also said that whatever we do to the least, we do to him. As Christians, our faith mandates that we must advocate for justice for the oppressed. Our faith mandates that we must act in ways that show love and compassion. Our faith mandates that we must seek truth and stand against injustice. Our faith means we should be advocating for justice for First Peoples. Next one. So I just wanted to make a point, I suppose, at the start. So hopefully people will recognise this place. Yeah? Europe, it's often in the news. We've just had the Olympics in France, and we've got Spain there, and Poland and Ukraine and Turkey and a whole bunch of other European nations. So we sort of understand that across these nations, they have some things in common, maybe some culinary similarities or maybe some language similarities, but they're also quite different. They also have some distinctive things that make them different. Different stories based on their location and cultural, linguistic, historical context. We get that, we know that, right? So if we go to the next slide, this is Australia. These are our nations in Australia. That do have some similarities as well, but also some distinct differences based on linguistic, cultural, historical context. Same, right? It's easy to understand. You know, these are nations, separate nations. Okay, point made. Next one. So we're talking about what do we do post-voice? Where do we go? How do we achieve reconciliation? How do we achieve justice? How are we going to move this nation forward given the outcome of the referendum? And I just want to talk about a few things quickly to make a point that I'll get to. This is a diagram that for me is really powerful. This shows when the Bringing Them Home report, which was about the stolen generations, the inquiry into the stolen generations. So the Bringing Them Home report was released in 1997. And then a little while after that, in 2008, I think, we had the national apology. Kevin Rudd, the then Prime Minister, issued a national apology talking about how sort of sad and tragic and awful and horrible and, you know, this history of removing Aboriginal kids was. And then governments proceeded to continue to remove Aboriginal children in greater and greater numbers. So, you know, you often hear people say, you know, if you say sorry, it sort of means you don't do it again. We are still doing it, albeit today under the guise of child protection, usually. And child protection is a really, really complex space, and I'm not suggesting that no child ever deserves to or needs to be removed. They don't deserve it, but they at times do need to be removed from harm. But this is not acceptable. This many of our children, not with their families, often not connected to their culture, is not acceptable. We need to find a way to deal with this. And our people have lots of answers. There's been several reports that have been written with lots of recommendations that tend to be ignored. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. This is a slide around the incarceration rate of Aboriginal people. And these are sort of closing the gap type issues, right? So if we look at this one, we see the 2031 target for is the dotted line across the centre. So this is bringing down the number of Aboriginal people in jail and juvenile detention, I think. So we look at the target, we're already well above the target, and rather than sort of coming down towards the target, the numbers are still going up. Okay, next one. And I'll just give a warning, and I probably should have done this at the start. I'm going to just briefly talk about suicide, so if anyone would like to just step out or put their fingers in their ears or not listen to me, that's perfectly fine. But suicide is something that impacts our communities significantly. We have one of the highest youth suicide rates in the world in some parts of this country, and in fact the highest youth suicide rate in certain parts of this country. Not acceptable for a first world country. So you look in 2022, the rate of per 100,000 for non-Aboriginal people was 11.7, the rate for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, 29.9. A very, very clear difference. And I think I've got one more. Yep. This is also a suicide-related diagram, so it's called Age-Specific Death Rates for Intentional Self-Harm by Indigenous Status. I thought this was an interesting and very sad and tragic diagram, but if we look at the age ranges, 15, 24, 25, 34, 35, 44, the light blue is the rate of Indigenous suicide effectively. The dark blue is non-Indigenous. So, I mean, just look at that. Like, our young people are doing this at undescribable rates, like more than double, probably more than triple in some cases, the rate. And that is not acceptable. It's not good enough. Interestingly, although I looked at this end, and the sort of, we actually get better. And I wondered if that's because as an Aboriginal person, by the time you get to that age, you're so happy that you've made it that far that you actually want to keep going for a little bit longer. You know, I'm not quite sure, but at least it tends to peter out. But this young people's issue, these are, and I won't go to the next slide just yet, but the point I want to make about this, these aren't just numbers. These are real people. Like, every one of those suicides impacts a family and a community. Like, every one of them. Every person in jail impacts a family and a community. Like, these are people. These are human beings, and this is a first world country, and this sort of disparity in socioeconomic statistics is not acceptable anymore. Next one. So, after the voice, where to from here? How do we address this? How do we do something constructive? Because we've talked about it for a long time, but we now need to do some stuff. Next one. Okay, so truth. This country needs to both acknowledge and teach about the colonisation of this country, i.e. the real story of an often brutal dispossession, not the fairy tale version of peaceful settlement. We need a Truth and Justice Commission, or similar, to support the recording of testimony and stories of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and to oversight the content of curriculum and other publications to address the whitewashing of history. Do we need legislation to make the denial of the stolen generations and attempted genocide it represents unlawful? And I say that because I've often thought about the situation in Germany, where they made it a criminal offence to deny the Holocaust. Now, I'm not suggesting we should make denial of stolen generations a criminal offence, but that denial can have the same amount of hurt for Aboriginal people, and particularly those who have been through it and are still suffering from it. You know, our people were put in camps. Our people were killed at times. You know, it wasn't maybe to the same sort of level of horror that occurred, but it's there, it's comparable. So do we need legislation to stop these people who I see regularly on social media going, it's all made up, they didn't do it, we only did it because, you know, we had to look after them because they couldn't look after themselves, like all this sort of dialogue that basically says, it didn't really happen, and if it did, it was for their own good. How do we stop that sort of narrative? Should unlawful race discrimination in New South Wales be a criminal offence rather than a civil matter? When we have the Anti-Discrimination Act, 1974, in New South Wales. So unlawful race discrimination is unlawful. Same with race vilification. It's unlawful. But how often do we actually see people, persecuted for those sorts of things? Not that often. And it still happens. I mean, if anyone goes on social media, the amount of racial vilification on social media is horrendous. And of course, I report things and then just get that automated response saying, it doesn't breach our community standards. And I wonder whose community standards aren't being breached, because my community standards are certainly being breached, but apparently the automated bot in Facebook doesn't see that. And then you go, request a further review. And if you get one, it's then, no, it still doesn't breach our community standards. If you want to appeal that, there's a process that you have to write into someone, and it's quite a convoluted process. So normally by that stage, I'm just exhausted and go, look, not today. So I don't do it. But I certainly do report things through the processes in the hope it might change things, but it just hasn't. I'm not sure if I've got it on the next slide, but I'll talk about it now anyway. So one of the things that was really obvious to me in the Voice debate, if we call it that, the lead up to the Voice, was the way social media was used as a platform to distribute false information, misinformation, disinformation, and basically fear-mongering amongst the wider community. I remember I went to Turramurra Uniting Church one Sunday, and I spoke to a group of people. There's probably about 100 people there, and I got really positive feedback, and I was feeling a little bit positive. This is a pretty good response. And I got home and I sat down and I turned the news on, and the first thing I saw was a banner across the top of the TV that said, "The divisive voice debate, blah, blah, blah." Divisive. So it was being labelled as divisive by media, sent out on the screen to potentially 20 million Australians, probably not quite that many, and I thought, I've gone and talked to 100 people, they've just talked to millions of people, spreading this divisive message, spreading fear, deliberately and intentionally. Like anyone who thinks that those media headlines were sort of just off the cuff and someone just wrote, no. These are very deliberate media messages designed to achieve an outcome. So if we are ever expected to have a fair and reasonable democracy, surely, for example, we need to be well informed to be able to cast an informed vote on something. So I think as a country, we need to actually have some legislation that requires some sort of reasonable level of truth or, what's the other word? Not goodwill. Good intention or best intention. But something that says if you're a politician and you put information out publicly, you need to have a reasonable basis for that information. And I know that's a tricky balancing act of freedom of speech versus when you pull someone up and go, actually, no, that's just really disingenuous and dishonest. But we can do that. We have ways of doing that. We're a smart enough nation to be able to come up with legislation that can ensure that our population gets good and reasonable and as accurate as possible information about things that we're required to vote on. Because if we're all told lies the whole way through, how do we know how to vote? We don't. We're just guessing, really. And that's not good enough for a good democracy. We need to be informed and vote in an informed way. Next one. So this question at the top there, when will the Australian legal system begin to hold people accountable for the deaths in custody of Aboriginal people? We've had over 540 deaths in custody, yet not one criminal conviction that I'm aware of. If anyone knows of one, I'd be happy to hear it after the discussion, but I'm not aware of any. Now, the mind boggles when you think 540 people have died while in custody, yet not once was there any criminal liability. Not once. Like it just, the odds don't stack up, right? Especially when you know levels of racism that have existed within police services and custodial correctional centres, and when you know that history, to look at that number 540 and think, it was just all natural causes or an accident or no one could help it. That's just not true. It's just not true. In fact, most of the coronial inquiries that I've read have found that those deaths in custody were basically a result of not following proper policies and practices. So the policies and practices are there, but for whatever reason, they're just conveniently ignored, and the result is our people die. So when someone's in a jail cell begging for mercy, begging for help because they're in pain, and correctional officers go, it's just a junkie coming down off drugs, don't worry about them, they'll be fine. And then they die. All it would take was for one of those people that were present to go, no, hang on, we've got a duty of care here. Regardless of what we may think, we have a duty of care to look after the life and safety of this person. Call a medical person, get them medical attention. Let the qualified experts make the decision of whether they're really in pain or not and whether they need medical treatment, not a correctional officer. So these are the things that we need to change. Governments need to change, agencies need to change. Saying, we'll do better next time, every single time is not good enough. We need that better now. When will inequity in the Australian legal system be effectively addressed to ensure Aboriginal people receive just treatment under Australian law? I was obviously in a bit of a rush for that one. When will we get equity? When will we get fair and reasonable treatment, as every Australian should? Oh, there's my little one. Do we need legislation to make denial of the stolen generations and attempted genocide it represents unlawful, perhaps even a criminal offence? For those who have seen a little short video called Bringing Them Home, which is a video about stolen generations, it's available on the website of the Synod. But in that video, a past president and former High Court judge, Sir Ronald Wilson, says that when he started in that inquiry, he didn't really think that the stolen generations was genocide. But he says, he's on video saying, as he progressed through that inquiry, when he looked at the international definition of what genocide is, he was in no doubt that these practices amounted to attempted genocide. And that is the truth of it. So, we need to just accept that as truth. Okay, next one. Okay. When will people stop pretending that Australia is not a racist country? While not every Australian is a racist, and they're not every Australian is racist, we've got some wonderful Australians. I don't think many people realise they hold racist views, and let's not forget that racism was normalised for centuries in this country. So while not every Australian is racist, every Aboriginal person is impacted by racism, and even those who pretend they aren't. I recently saw something that my friend Warren Mundine was saying that Australia is not a racist country, but then I did a bit of research and I found about 4 or 5 quotes of Warren in past media things saying Australia is a racist country. So he seems to have changed in recent years. But I've talked about this quite a bit, and at some point I thought, it doesn't matter if not every Australian is racist. Because it's like, imagine if you were a family and you suffered a really tragic, horrible event of having one of your family's members murdered. All right? Would we go up to that family, that grieving, traumatised family, and say, no, it's okay, not every Australian's a murderer, it's okay? Of course we wouldn't, because we understand the grief and the trauma and the sadness and that place that we would be in if that happened to our family and someone in our family. And it doesn't matter that not every Australian is a murderer for that family, because they're deep in their grief because of what's happened by one person. So our Aboriginal people are the same. If we encounter racism and discrimination and racial vilification, it doesn't matter that every Australian doesn't do that. It matters that that person does it, because the impact is there. The hurt, the pain, the trauma, the anger, the frustration. It doesn't matter that not every Australian is like that. It only matters that that one that was in front of us at the time is like that. And if you go onto social media, there are thousands on there that are like that. So I just want people to think about, is Australia a racist country? Not every Australian is racist, but certainly there is a lot of racism that impacts Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and families and communities in this country. It is absolutely real. Next one. Hopefully there's a next one. So for the child at school called a bung and a coon every day, it doesn't matter that not every Australian is racist. For the Aboriginal mother shopping with her kids who is told to get out of the store because her kids will steal something, it doesn't matter that not every Australian is racist. For the family trying to find rental accommodation that is told nothing is available, only to have their white friend walk in and be offered several properties to look at, it doesn't matter that not every Australian is racist. It only takes one act of racial discrimination to cause hurt and pain. Imagine the compounded impact of such things happening every day, every week, every year. And there's my little piece about, we don't tell a family of a murder victim that murder is okay, because not all Australians are murderers. We rightly acknowledge the awful action of one person that has caused hurt and pain to others. So why do people suggest that racism isn't an issue? Because not everyone is a racist. Next slide. Sovereignty and colonisation, the need for a treaty. And I'm moving fairly fast because we've got limited time, but I want to address a few issues. So the application of the doctrine of terra nullius to the Australian continent, suggesting that the continent was a land belonging to no one, was, as described in the High Court's Mabo decision, a legal fiction. There's a link there. It was a significant injustice. When Aboriginal people say we have never ceded sovereignty, we are referencing the unlawful use of the doctrine of terra nullius to bypass our legal rights as the lawful occupiers of the Australian continent at the time of colonisation by the British. Royal instructions given to Cook, he was instructed that, should he find the Great South Land, he was, with the consent of the natives, to take possession of convenient situations in the country in the name of the King of Great Britain. And I note, with the consent of the natives. By unlawfully applying the doctrine of terra nullius, Cook circumvented the instructions from the King, claiming the Australian continent as a possession of Britain on the 22nd of August 1770 at Possession Island in Queensland. Next slide. So I'll just leave that slide there, but I'll just talk briefly about treaty. There is nothing to be scared of about treaties. We have, I think, hundreds of them, certainly dozens of them, I think hundreds of them with countries and nations all around the world about all sorts of different things. I think even the AUKUS agreement is classified as a treaty. A treaty is basically an agreement between two parties. It's just an agreement, a negotiated agreement. So there's nothing, like we do it all the time, and there's a process. And treaties ultimately also need to be implemented in domestic legislation. So our parliaments will ultimately have control about how those treaties are implemented. So then they're actually not something to be scared about, because there's a whole bunch of checks and balances that are there to ensure that these things are okay and done well. Oh, it is on this slide, sorry. So the good thing about treaties is that they're able to address substantive rights-based issues, including land rights and self-determination. A treaty or treaties, and I say or treaties because that slide at the front with all of the different nations, you wouldn't expect, if Australia had to go in and form treaties with countries in Europe, you wouldn't expect to go in and form a treaty with with France, and then go, oh, and that'll just apply to Poland and Germany and all those other countries, because we did it with you, so no. What I think we need is an overarching treaty with a clause to enable, whether it's sub-treaties or, I think sub-treaties is probably the best way, to actually have locally based treaties with each nation of people to address their particular circumstances. Difficult, but not impossible. We can do this. So a treaty and treaties would allow past injustices to be acknowledged and addressed through just reparations, and would then allow for healing to occur. And I've got a story below that I'll get to. So consider the Treaty of Waitangi in 1840 in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Think about how New Zealand, for those who have been there, think about how New Zealand is different in its approach to First Peoples. I mean, the two things I think of immediately are their dual language national anthem, which is one of my favourite national anthems, I've got to say. I've heard it quite a few times in my days in Taekwondo, because New Zealand are really good at Taekwondo, so they win a lot of competitions. Just fact. And also the dual language in their schooling system. The difference between New Zealand and Australia is that in New Zealand they didn't apply the doctrine of terra nullius. They actually recognised that there were people there was systems of law there was culture there. What a treaty does in that sense is overlay so you have to acknowledge what's there to then overlay it with the treaty. So right from almost the word go, there was this recognition that there were First People in New Zealand, and they were acknowledged and recognised and then overlaid with this treaty. Don't get me wrong, the treaty is not perfect, I know, but it's a treaty, and if we look at New Zealand today compared to Australia today, we don't have a dual language national anthem, and I know it would be tricky because we've got all these languages, but yeah, there's just a difference, and I believe it's that initial claim of, there's no one here, because up until Mabo, the general thing was it was a land belonging to no one because it hadn't been overturned. It hadn't been proven to be a fiction. But in Mabo it was. So prior to Mabo, for any government to sort of go, well, how do we have a treaty with people that we're pretending aren't here? It's a bit difficult. Post Mabo, though, we now know that it wasn't a land belonging to no one, it was a land belonging to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So, okay, now that we know that, let's get on with it and do what we should have done in the first place. We should have followed the King's instructions in the first place, and with the consent of the natives, formed an amicable relationship. We can do that now. Okay, next one. So when we talk about reconciliation, I like this passage from Luke. So Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, "He has gone to be the guest of a sinner." But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." Next slide. So, and I credit Reverend Dr. Chris Budden with putting this sort of idea of this passage in my head. But so this passage it talks about acknowledging the wrong, making amends for the wrong through just reparations, forgiveness, and then being able to heal and rebuild relationships. Because in the Zacchaeus story, the repaying 4 times what he cheated people out of is the just reparation. And the contention is that theological reconciliation requires acknowledging the wrong, lamenting the wrong, just reparations for the wrong. I think I've missed one part, but acknowledging, recognising, just reparations, forgiveness, and then healing. In Australia, I think we've tried to go from acknowledging the wrong to the healing part, without the just reparations part in the middle. And in the theological framework of reconciliation, you're not going to get to the end if you try and bypass the middle bits. And reconciliation is a theological concept arising out of the South African situation and incorporated into Australia by the Howard government. Conveniently, sort of using the theological framework of reconciliation, but forgetting about the just reparations bit in the middle. Funnily enough, 30 years on, we're not there yet. So, I did jokingly say, we've got Reconciliation Australia, maybe we actually need to change it to Reparations Australia. Who knows? Oh, I've mentioned there. So if you don't believe me about that reparations thing, have a look at the Reconciliation Australia website and try and find mention of reparations anywhere. It's not there. They do good work, Reconciliation Australia. It's great that we're doing things that are building relationships, and individually that's wonderful, but in terms of a structural change and actually doing the work we need to address structural things, it's not really making that way forward, in my opinion. So I've said there, without just reparations, genuine reconciliation is impossible. Perhaps that is why we are still trying to reconcile after 30 years of attempted reconciliation. Something to think about. Next one. Building relationships. Moving forward, part of what we need to do is about building relationships. So if you want to build relationships, these are some things I would suggest that you can do. Learn. So do your own self-directed learning about Aboriginal perspectives on Australian history and social issues. Invest time on a regular basis to meet with Aboriginal community members and attend relevant community events for a period of at least 12 months. And I say that because if you want to build relationships with the local community, you need to be seen. And we will see you. Trust me. If we see someone who's not usual at our community events, you stand out a little bit to us because we know who the usual suspects are. And if someone else turns up, who are they? What are they doing over there? What's going on? And we'll talk, and someone will go, "Oh, that's Fred from here, and he just popped in, And then next time it's, "Oh, that fella's here again." And then the time after, they're here again. And then maybe a fourth time, it's like, I'm going to go and talk to them and find out why they keep turning up. And eventually discussions will happen, conversations will happen, and relationships will be built on that. But that won't happen with one visit. It has to be an intentional thing over time. Listen deeply with understanding, empathy, and compassion to the views and perspectives of Aboriginal community members. Lots of people have talked about the need for truth-telling. And a few people around the place have said, it's not, we've been telling the truth for a long time. What we need is truth hearing. We need people to hear that truth, and we need people to act on that truth. Just telling the truth achieves nothing if no one acts on it, if there's no change. If people just go, oh yeah, that's nice, continue on business as usual, nothing is going to change. So we actually need people to do deep listening, to have empathy and compassion, to put yourself in the shoes of that person who you're hearing from and think, how would I feel if that was my story, if that happened to me or my family? That's what we need to do. Deep. Put all your stuff aside and just be in the moment with the deep listening and put yourself in the shoes of that person. I mean, I find that very easy, which is often not a good thing. Some people find it harder. I wish I was a bit more in the middle maybe, because I just cry sometimes when I hear about the despair of people and the trauma that they're going through. But that's okay, because it empowers and enables me to do stuff like this. That's where I get my energy from. Support the aspirations and related needs of the Aboriginal community as best you can through providing whatever assistance you can. And lastly, I've got there, stand in solidarity with the community on issues such as the call for a treaty, stopping Aboriginal deaths in custody, and issues relating to Aboriginal land rights. And there's more. There's the Closing the Gap, there's the Raising the Age campaign. There's a number of sort of justice advocacy campaigns and issues that are floating around at the moment. So find out what they're about, do what you can, whether it's writing to your local MP or joining a march and a rally or whatever, providing some resources to other people who are doing that, providing them a space to meet so they can have a roof over their head while they talk about what their campaign's going to be. Lots of little things that can be done. Next slide. So I often talk about learning, and people are probably sick of being told they need to learn more. And as someone who has just finished a formal course, it's like it does wear you out. But learning, and most importantly understanding, is the most critical factor in engagement with First Peoples. The ability to appreciate different perspectives, to understand historical events and impacts, and differences in cultural protocols and worldviews is incredibly important. Learning and the knowledge gained will help, or at least should help, with empathy and compassion. Also a critical factor in the ability to engage with First Peoples and build trust relationships. So that's why learning is important. If you don't know, it's difficult to relate to someone else. If you don't know their story, if you don't know where they're coming from and their worldviews and the things that are important to them, we need to understand that. Next one. So how can we engage? What are the tricks to doing this? So a couple of ideas. You can invite local elders or community leaders to talk to your congregation, presbytery, social justice group or interest group. You can organise to attend a cultural tour or a cultural education session, local cultural activity offered by an Aboriginal community-controlled organisation, and of course we've got NAIDOC activities, National Reconciliation Week activities, events where local Aboriginal elders or community leaders are speaking. So all of those things will enable you in a fairly easy way to get a bit immersed and to hear from and to sit and think about Aboriginal perspectives and worldviews. Where invited, you can, and it's appropriate, you can participate in Aboriginal interagency meetings. Often local government has Aboriginal interagency meetings, and you can sort of link into them. It might just be to come and speak, to talk about your particular service or your particular thing and meet some people, and then you might be asked to sort of leave because it's a closed session again. But you can try that. Join a reconciliation group in your area. This may help to make some connections. And we've got some people from a reconciliation group over there, Maria and her husband. So those groups will already have some connections into the Aboriginal community because the work they've done over, I think, decades in some cases. So it can be easy to join one of those groups and piggyback off them a little bit to meet some people and start learning. See if there are any other Aboriginal organisations or groups in your area. See if there are any other organisations or groups in your area who are already engaging with the local Aboriginal community and explore opportunities for partnering or collaboration. Again, piggyback off the work they've done to build those relationships. It just saves you having to redo it. And the other thing is probably just to mention while I think of it, that our elders and community leaders are snowed under. They're busy. Initially, they're busy dealing with a lot of the crisis and trauma that happens in our communities all the time. So those respected elders and community leaders and workers are called in to help families, to help individuals, to provide comfort, support, guidance. They're very busy. They're also very busy because, good people sort of go, can you come and do a walk in the country? Can you come do knowledge in the country? Can you come and talk to us about this? Can you come? So they're very, very busy. So just be a little bit respectful of that. And in that sense, rather than you going and being another person asking for their time, if you join one of these reconciliation groups or similar groups that have already done that work, you don't need to actually go and knock on their door and bother them again, because you can slip in and piggyback in this group that's already done that work and had that discussion. Next one. What else can we do? Join advocacy campaigns, rallies and marches to show solidarity. Write to your local Member of Parliament to support advocacy initiatives for Aboriginal people and communities. Ensure you include Aboriginal voices and perspectives in your workplace and or church. Employ Aboriginal people in your businesses. Purchase goods and services from Aboriginal businesses. The return on the investment in terms of procurement from Aboriginal businesses, it's around between $3 to $4.50 per dollar spent is the social return. That's what the studies sort of find. So if you purchase from a mainstream provider, your return's about 1-to-1. If you purchase from an Aboriginal business, the return on that dollar spent is worth about $3.50, $4. Because that money goes into an Aboriginal business, it helps those Aboriginal people that run that business survive. It allows them to employ Aboriginal people. Aboriginal organisations tend to employ Aboriginal people at a much higher rate than non-Aboriginal businesses. Those Aboriginal business owners and those employees are role models in their community. They role model, work ethic and getting up and being that person that can run their own business. Like you can't be what you can't see, you often hear. So, it's that social return on that investment for procurement is really important. Make your church space available for use by the Aboriginal community for elders meetings, community meetings, social gatherings, etc. And often I just have to say, don't make your church space available like this. You know what? If you come to our service on Sunday, we'll let you use our hall. Don't do that. Just say, hey, we've got a hall. It's there if you'd like to use it. Because what will happen, and we can maybe put on some tea and coffee and throw some bickies in, and you guys can just use it for whatever you want to talk about. Because what will happen if that invitation is taken up is that group will come and meet, and as I said, we talk, it'll be like, so what's this place anyway? What's this church about? Oh, it's a Uniting Church or whatever church, and people will get curious. If you just leave people to their own devices, that we get curious about things. Like, hang on, what's going on over there? So eventually someone will say to the minister or to someone from the congregation, so what do you fellas do here? What's this all about? And that's your opportunity for engagement. That's your opportunity to talk to them. Oh, we're the Uniting Church. We're whatever church. This is what we do. We have a service on a Sunday. Look, feel free. If you want to pop in and just check us out, you're more than welcome. Maybe someone will pop along. Maybe they'll like our Uniting Church. Maybe they'll go back and tell their friends, this Uniting Church is all right, you should come down. They're good. They're good people. It's good. That's how you build the relationship. Not by going in and saying, we're the church, we know what you need, this is what you need, and if you do this, you can use our stuff. No. That's the church of old, to be frank. Okay, next one. Help with fundraising to support Aboriginal community initiatives, e.g. supporting a community program or a sporting team. Often in our communities, we have like a team of under-9s, footy side, who win the local comp and have an opportunity to go interstate or even maybe overseas, maybe over to New Zealand because they're so good. But the family, they might need boots or they might need travel money or they might need accommodation money when they get there. And in a lot of cases, that's a big ask. So maybe your local group, when you've built that relationship and you find out, you can go, hey, we can help you with some fundraising. We got a barbie, we can put on a sausage sizzle and make some money for you and help your kids get overseas. Because I can assure you that for at least some of those kids who come from areas that often our kids haven't travelled that far. They might have only travelled 20 k's from where they live. To take them overseas to see something new, to see something different, actually, for a lot of them, will open up their eyes to the world, literally the world of possibilities. I certainly know I hadn't travelled overseas till I was 38, and I ended up in Bangkok, and the poverty, seeing real poverty with no safety net, with no welfare system, people deforming themselves to be more effective beggars, it really makes you think, and it really makes you realise how good our system here is in Australia. It's not perfect, but it's there, and we have one, compared to people in many countries around the world that don't have that support and that system, that safety net. So I think it's easy to think that, oh, gee, things are bad in this country if you have no experience of anything anywhere else. But when you get more experience about what actually happens in other countries, it enables you to go, look, things aren't great, but they're not as bad as over there. So let's be thankful for what we do have. Next one. I'm probably getting close to time. Yep. Who do I contact? Very quickly. If anyone you know in your presbytery congregation group already has connections, have a chat to them. They can tell you who the right people are and maybe help you make the contact. We've got land councils. There's roughly 120 local Aboriginal land councils around the place. If you Google local Aboriginal land council in whatever area, you'll find the local one. I've got links up there that'll be on the slides that you can type in, I think, and have a look at. Introduce yourself to local Aboriginal organisations. And if you simply Google, what have I got? Aboriginal organisations in Redfern, or in, where are we? Sydney City. You will get links, and you'll see local Aboriginal organisations. So they're not hard to find. Supply Nation, for those of you who don't know about Supply Nation, it's a company that certifies and registers Aboriginal owned and operated businesses. So Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander operated businesses. So if you go to the Supply Nation website, you can either type in like plumber, or you can type in your postcode, and it will give you a list of, I think you do plumber and postcode, and it will tell you what Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander plumbing businesses are in your area. Same with caterers, electricians, artists, cultural educators, all that sort of stuff. So it's not a bad place to go if you want to find someone who's genuine Aboriginal business and certified and registered with Supply Nation. Lastly, a bit of a plug, but on the Synod's First Nations Resources website, there is a document called A Guide to Aboriginal Community Engagement and Building Trust Relationships, and I'm biased because I wrote it. So, but I do recommend it. I've made lots of mistakes in my community engagement, life. I've been growled at by lots of people because I put my foot in my mouth accidentally, and rather than you guys needing to do that, you can read that and learn from my mistakes rather than needing to make them yourself. In saying that, it's okay to make mistakes, right? None of us are perfect. We all make mistakes. So I often have people say to me, I really want to do something, or I really want to help, but I'm so scared of saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing, and it just, so I'd rather do nothing than upset someone or do the wrong thing. And I get that, because that's respect. It's just respectful people not wanting to do the wrong thing or get in trouble for putting their foot in their mouth. The trouble is with that, nothing changes, nothing happens. Status quo just stays. So I encourage you, if you have a heart for doing something positive, and you're respectful and your heart is in the right place, go for it. And if you do make a mistake, just humbly apologise. Fall on your sword, apologise, backpedal. The art of backpedaling will serve you very well. So the second you realise you've put your foot in your mouth, just apologise and reel it in. I'm so sorry, I really didn't mean it. I apologise if there was any disrespect shown. Just keep going until, and what will normally happen, because Aboriginal people generally, we're used to being the underdog, we're used to being the sort of oppressed minority, the ones that are normally doing it hard. So if we see someone else doing it a bit tough and feeling a bit low, we feel for that person. Well, look, it's all right, it's okay, don't worry about it, we'll do, moving on, However, if you make a mistake and someone pulls you up and you go, "Wow, rah, rah," it's on, right? It's on. There's a lot. You've drawn a line in the sand, and if you want to fight, you'll get one. Almost every time. Because we live in that space a lot of the time. We're used to that. So if we perceive that we tried to tell you you've done the wrong thing and you're going to stand there and justify what you've done, we're going to keep telling you that you've done the wrong thing, and we're going to keep making an issue about it. And sadly, the relationships that you may have spent a lot of time building up can be gone like that, just through someone saying something silly and then refusing to apologise for it. So just be humble and respectful, and you'll be all right. I'm not going to say you'll never be growled at, because it happens. I've been growled at, sometimes just in doing what we do, we mean well and we just slip up because we forgot or we forget. It happens. We're just human. Next. I think we're just about there. A few words to ponder. Martin Luther King Jr. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. The next one. Until justice is blind to colour, until education is unaware of race, until opportunity is unconcerned with the colour of men's skins, emancipation will be a proclamation but not a fact. And I apologise that he only mentioned men there, but it was a while ago. Reconciliation should be accompanied by justice, otherwise it will not last. While we all hope for peace, it shouldn't be peace at any cost, but peace based on principle, on justice. So just a few quotes to think about. Next slide. So we're going to go into small group discussions. I'm not sure, Kate, where'd Kate go? Did you want to have a chance for some clarifying quickly? Okay. So these are just some ideas of things. We're going to go into small groups in a minute just to give you a chance to have a talk about what I've said. There's some questions that maybe you can think about in your small groups. But before we go to there, have I said anything that has confused or that anyone would like some clarification around just before we go into those groups? Because I don't want people going into groups thinking, well, I think he said this, and having a fight about what I said. So if there's any clarity needed, please just let me know and I can briefly clarify. Wow. Oh, I was going to say I did pretty well then.
I hope this isn't a dumb question, but...
No such thing.
You talked a lot about reparation. I think about the unimaginable harm that has been caused, and I just can't even begin to imagine what reparation looks like. Is there anything you can help me with this conceptually?
Yeah. Look, I mean, reparation is a very broad thing, and it can include anything and everything that might work to actually address the injustice. And when we talk about reparations, I think about trying to restore people into the situation they would have been but for what's happened. Now, clearly in this country we can't give all the land back because a lot of it's privately owned now. It's difficult. However, we can certainly think about giving every piece of unused Crown land back because it's owned by the government. It was taken unlawfully in the first place. If it's not being used, why not give it back? In New South Wales, there was a situation where the Aboriginal Land Rights Act was created in 1983, and it was created as beneficial legislation. So it was meant to help Aboriginal people claim unused Crown land in New South Wales. Wonderful. Then the Land Council system started lodging claims on unused Crown land. A couple of years ago, there were 30,000 or more unprocessed claims. More than 30,000 claims. So, because what had happened is the legislation was created and then the administrating agency, which is Crown Lands, sort of just did a go slow. It's like, well, they can't get it if we don't process it. 30,000. Anyway, there has been some recent action taken. So we've got to be practical, we've got to be realistic, but I believe there are ways. I mean, financial compensation, often some people just tend to go, oh, they just want money. It's like, we don't just want money. Like, money won't actually fix everything. In fact, just money on its own won't fix a lot of things. We need good programs. We need community-controlled programs, community-informed programs. We need, we need to close the gap. We need stuff done that is actually going to be effective in bringing the incarceration and the suicide rates down, addressing chronic and endemic health issues, getting our people employed, addressing our issues with disability and chronic illness. Like, all of those things are the reparation, like bringing us back to par. Because, look, the reality is we're always going to have some disadvantaged Aboriginal people, just like non-Aboriginal people are always going to have some disadvantaged people. That's life, but it should be relatively comparable. We shouldn't have this many disadvantaged Aboriginal people in our community and this many in the non-Aboriginal community. We want this over here too. So whatever the reparation is, it should be thoughtful and logical and have an outcome base that's going to actually make a difference. Just giving someone money very rarely fixes much. But giving people opportunity, giving people access to things, changing systems to make them more accessible, things like that will really make a difference.
I think that's a great phrase. That just helped me then when you said bringing things back to par.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's all I wanted to say, because I was having the same dilemma. But yeah, that sounds manageable, and that's something we could really do. Yeah, thank you. That's a really good phrase. Thank you.
Nathan, I'm very inspired with the suggestion of an Aboriginal national anthem. And I think there should be a movement. Maybe the government should invite people to make suggestions like we did with the current national anthem, which a lot of people are not inspired with. Do you have any suggestions yourself on what might pass for a good Aboriginal national anthem?
As I mentioned, it's tricky because we have so many languages and dialects, but who's to say if we did it well, we could perhaps incorporate one line in maybe 30 languages, a line in language each, where there's a will. But we need the will.
Hi, Nathan. Hello, over here.
Hi.
Thank you. I'm not really clarifying. I really enjoyed everything that you've said, and I've learnt things, which is wonderful. I just know the thing that I'm going to be asking in our small group discussion, you might have some advice about. So where I live on the Central Coast of New South Wales, our traditional custodians are excluded by the Land Council process, and we try and communicate and support both, but it's coming to a big, it's all happening anyway. So the Land Council's trying to develop land and clear fell areas that the local descendants of Gomeroi do not want to happen. So it's hard. Do you have any advice for when you're caught between different Aboriginal groups?
Look, the Land Council system is a system created by whitefellow legislation. Let's be honest. It's a statutory model. In that Land Council system, what can happen is that they're sort of democratic type structures where the members elect their committees and their executive, and that local Land Council is open to any Aboriginal person in that area to join and become a member. So because of the displacement of our peoples, often people who join their local Aboriginal Land Council are not actually traditional owners from that country. And they, with best intention and best interest, they may end up on the executive, but the system tends to look to land councils as the authority, which in some cases they may well be, depending on their structure and who is actually in the executive, whether they're local traditional owners or other people who have just lived there for a long time and they're part of that community. What you will then have is you'll have Aboriginal community controlled organisations. So it could be a traditional owner group, it could be just a health organisation or a community services organisation or someone else, which again is members of the local Aboriginal community. So just a normal Aboriginal community controlled organisation may also have potentially people who are not from that area on their executive. But you will find sometimes traditional owner groups or native title claimant groups who in theory have traditional owners on them. So it's a difficult space because these disagreements and difficulties haven't been caused by our people, they've been caused by structures that have been imposed on us that we're trying to use to get something positive out of, but it can cause fighting and disagreement in our communities. When I do engagement, I will try and engage with all of the groups. You can either try and find neutral ground to invite everyone to, or if you need to, you just go and meet with all of them. And you tell them, I am meeting with all of them. Some of them might say, oh, you shouldn't meet with them, and you just go, look, to be fair, I'm just going to meet with everyone. But yeah, it is a difficult thing, and I don't know exactly what the solution is.
I just wonder if we could move into groups now. I wanted to make sure there wasn't anything really. I feel the questions are kind of going to that next step, and we want to make sure you have a chance to take what you've heard from Nathan and connect that with your own experience and just chat. Just wherever you are, just to form a small group. I find these things, people tend to make groups of 8 to 10 people too big. Okay, stop at 5 and say, let's form another group. So that people can be heard and chat and so forth. Feel free to move around. If there's other people here that are from community that you're part of, feel free to get up and join them, because maybe you want to talk about something specific your community can become engaged in. And so we'll take about 15 minutes to buzz, and then we'll come back. We'd like to hear from most of the groups. If you could have a short 1-minute little summary, we would love to hear that. And then if there are further questions, we'll have time to take those as well. People online, we've got about a dozen people online, so I think we'll just have a discussion among you all, and we'll chat to you about that. So thank you all, forming some groups now.
Thank you, everybody. We'll whip a microphone around to hear from the groups. I think we've got a group over here. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Anne, and in our small group we shared some different things that churches were doing.
Can we just stop now? I know it's extremely interesting and really exciting, but yeah, if we can just listen. Thank you.
So I'm part of the South Sydney community down at Redfern Waterloo, and we shared that we have a outdoor space, which is really unusual in the inner city, and we have a garden that we call Mirangarding, which is an Indigenous word for gathering, welcoming. And people can have their own garden bed there, but there's also communal areas where we have, in consultation with local people, local Indigenous people, planted native plants. We have some services out there, and it's part of an attempt to decolonise our church space, because we do have a very colonial looking sandstone frontage, huge church on top of the hill.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a quick one. We thought a reparation might be kind of a scarecrow for some people, and given that, as far as I understand, Aboriginals thinking about ownership of land is a lot different. I wondered if there's any comment.
I will comment on that, but I might just let it go around. I'll make a note, because yeah, I would like to comment on that one.
G'day. I just wanted to tell a story about that I think links to the reparation question. I come from a Uniting Church community in Darwin, Nightcliff Uniting Church, and we've been paying the rent for 25 years there. So we made a decision, it was contentious at the time, to pay the equivalent of council rates to the local incorporated Aboriginal organisation, and the same amount again to the local committee of the Aboriginal Islander Christian Congress. And it's now in our budget, and we do it every year.
Fantastic.
Sometimes people come and acknowledge that, and sometimes they don't. A couple of years we've forgotten, and then we've had to go and pay a couple of years in a row. But it's now in the budget, it's not questioned, and it happens. Not only the money, which is not worth much, But I think the statement that we're making to the local Larrakia people that we're committed to this long term, I think is important.
Yep.
And the other thing we said in this group about reparation is that I think we're... Sorry. And the other thing we said about reparation was that we're building a medieval cathedral where when you build the foundations, you know you're going to die before you see the building completed. I think reparations won't be complete until it's systemic, it's in education and it's in Parliament and it's paid by government. That's not going to happen in our lifetime. We've got to start now to see something finished later.
Yep. Every journey begins with the first step. Absolutely.
I know the people are reacting to the word reparation, and because I think for most people it means going back to the way it was and compensation for what was taken away then. And I think more, in the way you were describing it, it sounded to me more like remediation, where you're in a particular situation now and what you want are all the things that are wrong to be remediated so that you get to a state in which you can live a full life. And so I think people get scared of reparation because they have that other meaning in mind.
I think the question is, why are people scared of reparation? Because one of the things I was thinking this morning, and I'll respond to a few things now, one of the things I was thinking this morning, and now I've forgotten what I was thinking this morning, anyway, it'll come back to me. Often people talk about Aboriginal people as, Aboriginal people or communities are the problem. We're the problem, the Aboriginal problem. Aboriginal people did not create the problem. Colonisation and the policies and practices and what was done over the last 200 odd years has created the problem. So, expecting Aboriginal people to solve the problem that they didn't create is just unfair. And what's required to fix the problem is actually fixing the colonial structures that continue to dictate how everything transpires in this country. A couple of us saw a fellow the other day, Miguel de la Torre, I think his name is, and he said some interesting things about, colorism, for example, as one thing, but he described himself as, for example, a recovering racist and a recovering sexist. And people were a bit like, oh, what do you mean? You're still not there yet? And he explained that while he doesn't think he's a sexist person or a racist person, he acknowledges that in his country there are still a whole lot of structures that structurally are sexist and racist. And as a person, he hasn't actually taken steps to help try and remedy that yet. So in a sense, he still benefits and still has privilege through those systems. And in this country, non-Aboriginal people still get a hell of a lot of privilege out of those structures and systems that also at the same time tend to result in this disparity in socioeconomic circumstances. So we still have to address that, and Aboriginal people at 3% of the population are never going to have the power, politically or otherwise, to change those structural things. The people that do have the power to change those things are the people in this room and the broader non-Aboriginal population and the politicians they elect. So the power is in the hands of the people of this country to make that change. I'm not suggesting that's easy, and part of what my hope is that maybe, the people in this room will sort of go, oh, okay, and maybe talk to some other people. I think it was Gandhi that talked about circles of influence. So you don't try and change the minds of everybody or bring everybody along with you. You just try and influence those that you can. And at the moment, you are the people I can. So think about those systems things, because as long as those systems and systemic things don't change, it's going to be very difficult to address the gap. We actually need structural change. People have heard of institutionalised racism and structural racism and those sorts of things. It's real. You know, it might be invisible to most people, but for Aboriginal people, and when you look at the data, it's very visible. So I wrote somewhere that, you know, ignorance is bliss. And I think for a lot of Australians who don't actually know an Aboriginal person, and I meet them all the time, people say, oh, you're the first Aboriginal person I've ever met, which I find amazing, because, you know, surely you must have met at least someone before me. But for a lot of people, they just don't know, and it doesn't impact their lives at all, and therefore they don't think about it, therefore ignorance is bliss. I hope that by at least saying it and stating it here, people can't be ignorantly in bliss anymore. At least you people, because you know now, okay? What you choose to do with that, I hope, you know, some of you will try and run with that in some ways and try and raise that issue and highlight that issue. You might write to local MPs, you might think about who you vote for, think about the platforms that people are running on. I won't tell you who to vote for, but, you know, just do that critical analysis of what they actually stand for, and will they actually make a difference in their policies in relation to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I'll stop there. But yeah. Oh, sorry, I just want to respond to the question of ownership of land. So Aboriginal people obviously have a millennia-long connection with creation. We've cared for country and for all creation really, really well in a sustainable, symbiotic way for millennia. So we never actually, traditionally, we just didn't think about owning the land as an asset. For us, that's a very Western, Eurocentric concept of assets and individually owning things. We didn't think that way. The land was what sustained us, was what kept us alive. So there was a great mutual respect between country and people, because without country there would be no people. Today, the world is just sort of getting to the point of going, hang on, climate change, hang on, without creation, without the environment, we die. And it's true. You know, Aboriginal people have known this forever, and people think that we lived in very primitive ways, but yet those primitive ways could have been sustained forever. The way we're now currently living, I don't know how long that can be sustained for, but certainly not forever. So something's got to give. So that was how we used to look at land, and now we've been forced in a situation where people have taken our land off us for economic gain and for mining and as assets and things like that. So while we still have our traditional relationship with land, you know, we're not silly people. We know that land equals an asset. And we might not look at that as an economic asset. We might, if we choose to, in this day and age. But we certainly look at it as an asset of country, as an asset of things that sustains us, that contains our law, that is a place for ceremony and a place for business. So whether we see it as an asset or whatever, like we now consider, I think, that, you know, that's our land in an asset sense, and we want it back. So yes, we have this sort of wonderful relationship with land, but in a modern context, we see land in similar ways to what everyone else does, you know, because people take it off us and use it for stuff, and we think, well, hang on, if our land's going to be mined, why shouldn't we have a say in where and how that mining happens, and why shouldn't we be getting the profit out of that? You know, and yeah. So yes, there is that traditional sense, and a lot of non-Aboriginal people like to say, oh, but you don't own land anyway, so what, you know, why does it mean anything to you? Well, it means it because it is everything to us. It's much more than just an asset. It's much more than just an economic development tool, but we can also see it as that if it helps us and is good for our community.
Yeah, there might be a few people around here who haven't spoken yet, but Nathan, just on what you just said, which is separate to our group, I got very interested years ago with what Camilla Cowley was doing in around St George in Queensland, where she was looking at making perpetual access to her property with pro bono legal people, so that knowing that Aboriginal people could have access to the property for whatever they wished,
without ceding ownership. So that maybe that could be something that could happen in the future. And the other thing, we didn't get caught up that much in solutions. We got talked about the challenges, but just some of the challenges of getting caught up in local land councils and various people where it's very hard to get above it to actually find a way to work when all the local groups are aligned with one or the other and all have their factions. So it can be a bit hard to find a way to move forward. But, you know, at least if you can try and talk to various people, and you can just do your best, really, can't you?
You can. It's all you can do. You can only do your best. And I've often talked about this conflict that we often have in our communities. And one of the ways that I try and get people to think about that and put it in context is, you know, with the oppression and marginalisation and disadvantage in our communities that impacts our families and communities. So you might have, you know, a land council. So what happened some years ago in some places is that the local Department of Housing said, oh, we've got some Aboriginal housing, but we'll just give it to the land council because they're better off dealing with it. Which sort of meant, I think, this is a headache, here, you have it. Because what happened was if a land council's allocated 10, 12, 15, whatever, however many public housing properties to then manage, you've actually got in that community probably 30 families that are vying for 8, 10, 12 houses. Right? Like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, shelter, roof over your head, pretty important. It means it's life, possibly death, you know, no roof, no, you know, shelter. So for these families in this situation where the land council get given 10 houses and there's 30 or more families that need housing, it causes conflict because people are like, no, I should get that house. No, I need that house more than you. And there's a whole range of subjective factors that come into this. Well, is it who's got the most kids? Is it who's got the least kids? Is it who's been a member of the land council the longest? Is it who's objectively in most need? Like, how do you work that out? So it does cause conflict. And I say this really respectfully, but I want people to think about what happens when you get one chip and you throw it into a pack of seagulls. Those seagulls aren't thinking, my strategy for doing this is, they're just thinking, I want the chip, right? Because I need the chip, because I'm hungry. So, you know, limited resources, lots of people needing the resources, it can cause conflict. And that's unfortunately what happens. And it's understandable. The solution, of course, is to ensure that every one of those families has adequate housing. That solution is obvious. But do people make that happen? Nope. So, you know, why aren't we addressing, why aren't governments addressing that problem? Why isn't the Department of Housing addressing that problem? You know, I mean, there is the Aboriginal Housing Office, which sort of was created to sort of deal with Aboriginal housing. But, you know, it often, you know, I actually think, you know, giving public housing houses to Aboriginal land councils to manage was possibly one of the worst things that ever happened, because it created so much and creates so much conflict for our communities. It used to be the Department of Housing that would make the decision, and we'd hate the Department of Housing. You know, bloody Department of Housing, they don't know what they're doing. But that was actually better than us fighting amongst ourselves. You know, because government departments are these faceless, nameless things up there, so they don't, you know, particularly mind if we don't like them. But our members of our communities, we feel it when we hurt our people or we can't give our people what we'd like to. And those leadership roles are therefore really difficult at times because you can't please everyone all the time. And we're put in that situation because of the resourcing. So anyway, I'll stop there.
Yeah, just to speak from our little group over here, we were, I think, tussling with some of the fundamental issues about how do you actually bring issues of justice and inclusion into dialogue with our Western systems of government and tradition. And you know, we were sort of struggling between ourselves, I think, around some of the debates in that. So I think where we landed that was kind of more clear was more kind of a bottom-up thing from, you know, conversations about how anthems might change and the experience in schools of anthems of Aboriginal language being the context for celebrating Australianness, and things like networks that we might build between our own communities and our own areas of activity and other areas. Yeah, does that cover it well enough? No, I'm not trying to. Yeah, I'm trying to hold we had a real debate. Put it that way. That'll do, I think.
Debate is okay. In fact, debate and respectful debate is important.
I'm speaking on behalf of the group online, and we had quite a good discussion, and we came up with the need for truth and learning about history, because we don't know it. We never learnt anything about the Aboriginals in school. It was all about England. The programs that are being put out for the Aboriginal people, they need to be listening to the communities. That was a strong suggestion and agreed with. We need to be thinking about giving to Aboriginal groups, and one example was they have a toilet paper group, which is in contrast with the something about the crap, is it? And another one was putting money towards community first. There are probably many others we could do. One suggestion was that Eremos programs like this and those others that were involved in it should happen more often. We need more of them. And we need to be talking to our own congregations more as part of the learning too. That was from this group. Thank you.
And just dovetailing of that, in terms of getting conversations in congregations, I wonder whether you might speak to that, Nathan.
Wonderful segue. I had this here to remind me to talk about it. So something that the Synod of New South Wales and the ACT has put together is this local walking together action plan template. So the Synod has a big walking together action plan, which is sort of like a reconciliation action plan, but for anyone who knows about reconciliation action plans or RAPs, they're quite good for top-down sort of corporate type structures where you've got a board and a CEO and they say this is what we're going to do and it goes down the line. Our lovely church, wonderful church, is sort of a bottom-up organisation, so a top-down approach really wouldn't work. So we created a walking together action plan, which is a range of suggested ideas and things that we encourage the Synod, presbyteries and congregations to do in their space if they wish. At a Synod level, we've done things like today 3% of all proceeds of sale of church properties is allocated towards supporting our Uniting Aboriginal Islander Christian Congress and other First Peoples initiatives endorsed through the Synod. We have a 3% employment target, so we're going to be working towards getting a few more Aboriginal people employed across the Synod. We've got a 3% procurement target to generate income for Aboriginal businesses through our procurement. That one's probably got a long way to go because we need to develop a procurement strategy. And also difficult because church councils make their own decisions about what they purchase and how, similarly with presbytery. So, but certainly at a Synod level we can work on that strategically. So this document is something that has a range of, I'll just skip to the, sort of has engagement and then a range of possible things that you might want to do, and you can work through it in a group, tick the ones that you like in the various sections, and then at the end there's an open sort of text field for bespoke type things. That might be things you're already doing in your congregation, so the garden sort of initiative, things that are already happening, and other things that you might think, oh, look, in our context, we can do this really cool idea. So they're the things you pop in there. And there's also a poster version, a graphic poster version that you can cut and paste all the things onto and display in your particular church or place. So that's just a little sort of thing that we're doing to encourage people to, to learn, to build relationships, to get educated and do good things. So.
It's come up quite a few times, people asking how they can get to know some more and how to get to know the specifics and meet other people. I'd like to mention there's an opportunity coming up in October in Wentworthville, Western Sydney near Parramatta. We have significant national Aboriginal leaders like Ray Minikun and Jeff Scott coming, as well as local Darug people, looking at the issues, looking at the history, where things have gone, how things need to go. We also have the very significant Aboriginal artist, Jamie Eastwood. Is it? Oh, it's not loud enough, sorry. So we have the black brochures in the back there. They look like that. And I think it would be wonderful to have I know that many people here don't come from Western Sydney, so we'd really welcome having other people showing the interest in this topic and also getting to know you wonderful people. So please take a look at it, and also, if you would like to know something, like you're wondering about your community, where you could find someone, there's a number on the bottom here. If you give us a call, we'd be happy to put you in contact with anybody we know, there's quite a few, who might be in your area.
Great, thanks, Richard. That's great. So we'll have a thank you now. You ready? Okay. Oh, no, you're sorry, Bill. Yes, yes.
Mike?
Yeah, we're finished. Time for thank yous.
You want to use this one?
Yeah. I've been asked to thank you for your presentation today. I think that what I've valued so much is its practicality, because you're down at the grassroots level, and that's where we all need to be. And I think that to conclude our series on this note is so important. It certainly is from my point of view. So I want to thank you for that. There's so many things that struck me about what you've been saying, but some of these issues of just being able to listen and to be informed. And I know some churches, Pitt Street has been running their own sort of walking together group, which has been very helpful. Pitt Street also has had paying the rent. But I think, all of us, or some of us might like personally to say, well, look at your own finances. Are there ways you can pay the rent? And I personally think there are a number of organisations that are so well supporting, and one that I'll plug is Indigenous Literacy Foundation. I think that's so important to support the work that's been done there. And just to be better informed. Certainly, one of my resolutions after The Voice went down was, well, I'm going to make myself better informed. And if we can encourage others in our circle to do that, that will be a very important thing. So thank you very much, Nathan. I also want to thank Kate, who has done so much of the work in getting this series together. And it's really been, it wouldn't have happened without Kate's very hard and dedicated work. And so can we thank Nathan and Kate, please? Now, thank you. Come and have something to eat. Yeah.
So very briefly, just three things. First of all, thank you to everyone for coming. Secondly, do stay if you can for afternoon tea, which is provided part of our commitment to supporting Aboriginal people from Aboriginal hospitality. And then finally, to offer a little blessing. Above us you see some angels, but I always feel that angels are not just sort of things beyond us, but amongst us. People like Nathan and others who've spoken in this series, and those of us here, and we're called too to be angels, to be messengers of light for others. So there's a little blessing in that spirit. May the angels of love continue to bless us in their beauty and truth-telling. May the angel of joy stir our hearts to come alive to the sacredness of country around us and beneath us. May the angel of compassion open our eyes to the suffering around and beyond us. May the angel of courage give us strength and humility to walk together for justice with First Nations peoples. And may all the angels of the Gadi be our sheltering and empowering guardians this day and always. Amen.